Welcome to the Cowbell Kingdom Podcast. I am James Ham. Normally, this is when I say with me as always, Mr. Jonathan Santiago, but as all of you know, John has moved on. He is now a fully functioning member of the Las Vegas community. And, I just want to take a second to say a couple of things about the podcast. Number one, this is episode 167. We've been doing the podcast for over 3 years, and it's something that I take a lot of pride in and something that I love personally. It's a way for us as writers to show a different side of ourselves, to give you more information that we sometimes can't write or can't put into words a specific way. And so I take a lot of pride in the podcast. And when John decided to step away, I looked at it as an opportunity for me to find the right person to mix in with me. And we haven't talked about who we've brought in as our new co-host, but it's a familiar voice. It's someone that the people of Sacramento like. He's a friend of mine, and I'm very, very excited to announce that I am joined today by NBC Sports Aaron Bruski as my new co-host of the Cowbell Kingdom Podcast. Aaron, how are you?
I'm great after you talk about me like that. And I'm at the same time, I'm a little bit sad because I'm gonna miss John. When you mentioned Las Vegas, the last time I saw John, it technically was the end of the road. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but he does a stirring rendition of Boys to Men.
That is one thing that people don't know, that John is one of the most classic karaoke singers of all time. He is a joy to karaoke with, which is something I will miss because we do that in Sacramento. But when we go out to Summer League, Brewski, you may catch us up on stage singing duets or maybe singing some Neil Diamond. These are things that the Cowbell Kingdom crew have been known to do out at hot spots around the world.
Well, yeah, well that night there was probably I'd say 50 people singing along. It was quite a scene, and John, he held his own. He's got a good singing voice.
He does have a good sing. It's surprising, and he sings with a deep vibrato. I don't think anyone sees that coming, but I have seen it. I've seen it quite a few times. So when John starts working the room, that's when it's like, oh my goodness, John is working the room. All right, so John is gone. And Aaron Bruski is the new co-host of the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. And we're going to do some things a little different this year, Aaron. We're going to bring in some broader scale things around the NBA. We're going to bring in a little fantasy sports because those are things that you bring, specialties that you bring that are different. And so it's going to be Kings Talk. We're still going to have the interview portion of the podcast, which will probably run before the Aaron Bruski, James Ham version of the podcast, which is what we typically do. But then we're going to delve into a lot of topics. So first and foremost, the Sacramento Kings are coming off 2 losses in China. And, if you look and you watch those games and you kind of look at the feel of the games, I'm just going to put it out there. Michael Malone does not care about wins and losses in preseason this year. He's done with worrying about wins and losses in preseason, and he wanted to make sure he was mixing and matching all of these crazy lineups that he's going to have going into this season. Is that a fair assessment, Aaron?
Yeah, I think so. I would even go as far as to say I don't think he personally cares about wins and losses in the season as long as his guys are playing the right way. He would never say that. But it's amazing in Sacramento. Everybody hangs on every bouncing ball of the preseason, and it's really meaningless. Guys,
Meaningless. Yes.
meaningless. Yeah, guys could play great in the preseason and then just tank the rest of the season. We've seen it year after year after year. So, caution Kings fans to just kind of take a step off the ledge when they see things like losses or whatever have you. But there's actually been some positive things. I think every buzzword that you've heard out of them in the off season, pick up the pace, pass the ball, everything that they've wanted to hit, it became such of a big deal, during the off season for obvious reasons we'll probably get into later, that I think it's permeated the culture. So yes, the culture has changed. We'll see if that actually pans out in the regular season.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is like Darren Collison is shooting 60% from the field. That's not going to continue
No.
in the regular season. Like Darren Collison a solid NBA player. He's not a 60% shooter from the field. And I think you're right, Aaron. What we've seen so far is that the Kings are really pushing the pace. They're really, they're driving the ball like in a crazy way, sort of a run and gun offense. But it still has a good flow. I mean, the first game there was a ton of turnovers. I think they had 29 turnovers in one of the first two preseason games. But they've toned that back. We've seen better ball movement. And the guy who's really, really standing out as far as ball movement and the way he's bringing versatility, it's Omri Caspi. And to me, that is a huge surprise. I like Omri. I covered Omri when he was here in his first stint. I did not expect him to maybe even make this team, but more to play a role on this team at all. And that's not at all what we're seeing so far.
Well, and it's crazy because you look at the roster and somebody's going to have to sit. And with Omri playing the way that he's playing, with the way that they brought in and envisioned him as a potential stretch four, but can also play the three, he is complicating an already complicated situation. That's probably my biggest question mark for this team is guys don't play well unless the ball's in their hand a lot. You see that all the time. Guys' free throw percentages go down when they don't shoot a lot of free throws. So how is Coach Malone going to distribute these minutes and keep guys, playing well, keep them engaged, keep them happy? We know that the two pillars are Rudy Gay and DeMarcus Cousins, but everything beyond that, I don't know who sits and who starts, and I guess we'll find that out here in the next couple days.
Yeah, realistically, the guy who's been on the short end of the stick so far is Derek Williams. Derek Williams came in. He's in great shape. He's lost a ton of weight. He's really done a lot of nice things with his shot. He looks balanced. He's not falling right or left or back or forward, which has always been a massive issue with him. I talked to Ryan Bowen about this. Ryan Bowen said, "Look, we asked Derek, to not jump so high on his jump shot. He's getting all the way at the top of his arc, and then he starts losing his balance, and so he's shooting on the way down. He's doing all these things." And I'm watching him shoot with Jason Thompson, and they're having 3-point drills, and they're hitting 10, 12 out of 15 from each spot on the floor. And it looks sustainable, but then you get to the game, and Derek Williams is an afterthought. And John and I always talked about this in the past that it always felt like last season that the Kings were showcasing players. And Derek Williams is a prime example of a guy that you would probably want to showcase right now. He's a $6.3 million expiring contract. He's got some value as far as a trade chip, but he's lost out most of his minutes to a guy who's making, $900,000 a year on a veteran minimum contract in Omri Caspi. So Derek Williams seems to be the odd man out at this point.
Well, and it's not just in the front court, it's also in the back court. You've got Ray McCallum, who, for all intents and purposes, can't. I don't see how he can see the floor unless Malone wants to run, an 11-man rotation or a 12-man rotation. There's going to be certain guys that have to sit. Ramon Sessions and Darren Collison, if splitting minutes equally at the one, are going to play 24 minutes a game if you cut it in half. You got your two youngsters at shooting guard. I don't think that Stauskas has done anything to say he shouldn't be on the floor. McLemore has certainly shown that he's given himself a chance to keep the starting job. There's been some ups and downs during these preseasons, but he's given some glimmers. So I don't think you can borrow from the shooting guard bucket to hand it over to the point guard bucket. So I don't see where there's going to be certain guys that are going to have to sit, and it's going to be, like you said, a guy like Derek Williams. What does Carl Landry do? I've heard talk that Jason Thompson could start at the 4. So then now you're introducing Ryan Hollins in as a backup center. So there's a lot of pieces, and when you start chopping people's minutes down, that's where you get the problems in the locker room, and you get people that don't think they're getting enough touches. And historically, and not every case, but it usually doesn't work out. So I want to see how they're going to pare down their rotation.
Yeah, I can see that. I think we're also going to see a lot of three-guard sets with this team, with Rudy Gay shifting to the 4, DeMarcus Cousins at the 5, or Jason Thompson at the 5 with Rudy Gay at the 4, and go Stauskas and McLemore and one of the point guards, or go a dual point guard and shift Stauskas or McLemore over to the small. I think we're going to see a lot of that. You're right. I think Ray McCallum right now is completely the odd man out. I'm very surprised by how far off in the distance it looks like Ray McCallum is. I mean, he's played twice in preseason and through 4 games, and it's been bit minutes, and in those minutes he hasn't looked that effective. He's the one guy I'm going to point this out. We talked about this at summer league as well, but Ray McCallum, he dribbles the ball too much. He's an over dribbler, and it's something that the Kings have tried to move away from. I like him as a reserve shooting guard more than I like him at the point guard at this position at this point, because I don't think he can run an offense effectively and quickly like what the Kings are trying to accomplish this season. And at the shooting guard position, I do think he is a good passer, he's a good defender, he's got good athleticism, he's a good rebounder for a point guard slash two guard. But he also has good size. He's 6'3", and I actually give him an extra couple of inches in height because he's one of those short neck, like short head guys. So his shoulders are a taller player's shoulders, in my opinion.
Have you mentioned this to him yet?
He's no, I haven't. He's the reverse of Noah Vonleh, basically. Noah Vonleh is like 6'5" with like a giraffe neck and head, and so I look at Ray McCallum as a guy who can play a 6'6" shooting guard with no problem. I don't think he has any issues at all. He's got long arms. He's got broad shoulders. He's a strong kid. He's worked really hard on his game. But it's really difficult to look at Ray and say, hey, sorry, man, you had a great 10-game run near the end of the season where we had to play you 48 minutes a game. You did some really nice things in Summer League. But that's the reality of the NBA, isn't it? It's like, look, you're not there yet, and this team is ready to push forward and to go for wins. And we're going to do that with two veterans who really aren't that old veterans. We're looking at like 26 and 28. Sessions, they got on a bargain basement, like $2 million a year for 2 years. Collison, I know we can have a discussion all day long on the Collison Isaiah Thomas thing, but realistically, if you've got these two guys instead of Isaiah Thomas, they kind of give you different looks. You can see how two guys might be better than one, and this could work out for the Kings. But man, Ray McCallum is just so far down the totem pole at this point.
The Sessions thing is really intriguing to me because, like you mentioned, the contract, it's not that expensive. I'd say dollar for dollar, it's a really good deal. You don't typically find guys that can put the ball in the hole like that, and we've been following Sessions since he was in Milwaukee. Every now and then he'd crank off a near triple double, and nobody knew who the guy was. And he's always had this knack of being productive at every stop. And then the criticisms are, of course, his defense. He's been hitting threes lately. Typically, that's not something he does with great frequency, but he tends to disappear at times. You can ask the Laker fans about that. But for what he was brought in to do, he really you get the sense that the Kings, they wanted to make sure that point guard wasn't a problem. And so they said, you know what, Ramon Sessions is out there in the market. Let's go get him. The offshoot of that is, while Sessions is going to give something to the team, you've got the Ray McCallum situation. But again, those two guys, they can't split at 24 minutes a game and really, truly have command of the game itself. And you're talking about Ray McCallum over dribbling, and a lot of people said Isaiah Thomas over dribbled. This is all going to boil down to how well do the front court players gel. Are the screens being delivered on time? DeMarcus Cousins is big in this. Jason Thompson is huge in this. These guys, typically for the first 4 to 5, 6 seconds of a play clock, kind of are feeling the play out, and they still don't know what they want to do with where they're going. And that's why you saw so many, pick and rolls that, Isaiah would pull the ball out, reset, and then the shot clock gets down to 12 seconds and it's time for a scramble and a heave. So I think you're going to see, if positionless basketball is truly going to work, this Kings team will be the ones that do it. They have talent up and down the roster. They don't have game-breaking talent, but they're going to either be the test case that works, or they're going to be the case that didn't work. And that's what I think the number one thing I've gotten out of this preseason for the Kings is there's a sense of urgency amongst this team. They know that now is the time. People's jobs are probably on the line. They've got to win some games, exceed the predictions of 31 games. I don't know if it was you or Vegas or me. Whoever
That's
said
Vegas.
that.
Vegas is 31. Yeah.
Yeah. So people's jobs are on the line. You sense this urgency. They're doing the things that management has said they want these guys to do. Play fast, pass the ball, defend. Now we get to see if the personnel can actually do the job.
Yeah, I like the personnel that they've brought in for a couple of specific reasons. First of all, I think when you add Sessions and you add Collison to a backcourt that's really young, Stauskas and McLemore, both 21 years old. Ray McCallum, I think, is 23. But those guys are really young and really inexperienced. I mean, McLemore's got 82 games under his belt. McCallum has 44 games under his belt, and Stauskas had never played a minute in the NBA. So you have support there. And then when you go over to the small forward position, you've got Rudy Gay who can lead a young Derek Williams, but also Omri Caspi's brought in, who's at this point he's actually a veteran. He's a 26-year-old guy, but he's still got springy legs. He's still got he's a better defined player than he was as a Sacramento King when he was young. He knows his role. It's no longer he's the Israeli Michael Jordan. But then when you go to the power forward position too, you have veteran leadership there that can support DeMarcus Cousins, but they can support everybody. Reggie Evans, Jason Thompson, Carl Landry, all veterans. And then the same thing with Ryan Hollins backing up DeMarcus Cousins at the center position. Hollins may not play more than, last year he played, 9 minutes a game he averaged? I think he could play probably the same here, maybe less, 7 to 9 minutes a game. But you're going to see a lot of different looks from the Kings. And you're right. This is a season where they have to actually start taking all of this talent that they may or may not have and producing victories. And we've talked about this for a long time with DeMarcus Cousins. Even back when it was DeMarcus and Tyreek, it's time to take potential and convert it to production. And we haven't seen it yet. 28 games won't fly. Vivek Ranadive was very clear that he expects a much better season this year. They only have this season and the next season before they move into the new building. You want to be primed to make that big leap next year. And in order to do that, they need to start piecing this team together in the right way. And I'm not sure that they've done it completely, but I'm at least intrigued. This team is growing on me, Aaron. It's growing on me because I keep looking at sort of the pieces that come off the bench, and we're no longer looking at young players who can't play at all, who are coming in here just to steal minutes. I feel like this team has balance. It has veteran leadership all over the court, and it does have talent. It may not be the best talent, but it does have talent.
Well, it would be great if they played in the East, but unfortunately, Sacramento is located in California, and they have to play in the West. I think that you're right. The team it grows on you. For all of the controversy about Isaiah and Darren Collison, I think that piece of the team is probably the thing I worry about least with them right now. I worry, for the most part, about can DeMarcus Cousins take that step forward? He has to. He says he wants only 5 technical fouls. I don't think he probably should have said that. He might might pick a little higher number there.
That was
But
Reggie Evans, just so you know.
was it Reggie? Okay.
Reggie put that in his locker.
Oh boy.
5 technical. That's what he did. 5 technical. He put it up in his locker, and then he took an Instagram, and it went
It
viral.
went viral.
Yeah, and that's fine,
Oh
But
yeah, it's all fun.
Reggie Evans won't talk to the media because he's like, hey, the media didn't want to talk to me before I did that, so why do they want to talk to me now?
Oh,
So
gotcha. That's funny. Yeah, I think that this is DeMarcus's season. He got everything his way. He's got the situation that he wants. He's got, kind of the pieces around him that, he feels comfortable with. I think now they've got to exceed expectations. And the one thing that makes me feel like they've got a fighting chance is I think that Mike Malone is the right guy for this job. He's got the energy for it. He's definitely got it upstairs to be able to handle it, X's and O's. He's got a mean pick and roll game, according to Vine. Um, so I share your optimism. I don't think I would update my wins prediction. I think I said something like 32 wins or something, the other day when we were on. But the Kings at least have that fighting chance. So, the sky isn't falling if you're a Sacramento Kings fan.
yeah, I would say my prediction now is up to 34 wins, and I think it's really strange because this is gonna sound just totally out there in left field. Before the Ramon Sessions edition, I had them at about 24 wins, and I don't think Ramon Sessions is worth 10 wins, but I think Ramon Sessions mixed with the other guys can equal that. The support that Ramon gives and the way that it can deflect, it's not just that Ramon Sessions can add 10 wins. It's that Ramon Sessions over Ray McCallum can add a couple of wins, and Ramon Sessions playing alongside Collinson can add a couple of wins. And if someone gets hurt, if Collison gets hurt, I think Ramon Sessions is a guy who can actually support the team better and get you higher up. So that's what I mean by I think they can win 34 games. I think there's an outside chance that like we see some major chemistry like come together and this team start running and gunning and like shocking people, and there's an outside shot that they could go for 40 wins, but I'm never going to say like this team's got 48 win potential or anything like that. I mean they're a long ways away from a finished product.
Well, and that's I think the thing that people have to keep in mind is that when you set the course to make Rudy and DeMarcus your number one and number two guys, you're really planning for the future. You're saying there's got to be another piece that comes in, whether that be via the draft, probably less likely, to some free agent acquisition that's going to say, you know what, they got a new arena. I like what they're doing. I like the players. I like the direction. I like the coach. And you do that by finding out this year which guys are going to work out. And I think one thing that will probably dictate it more than anything, and Mike Malone would probably agree, is going to be, can this team gel defensively? Can they rotate? When you play a backcourt of Ramon Sessions and say Nick Stauskas, that's going to cause some problems.
Yes.
Can the guys in the back who traditionally have been some of the worst rotating big men in the entire league, can they rotate? Can they hedge? Can they pre-rotate? All these things that might have seemed like foreign concepts like 2-3 years ago. Can they do these things? And that will determine whether there's winning and losing and what the attitude in the locker room's like.
Yeah, and I think that's where you see like you're gonna see odd lineups. If you do see Stauskas and Sessions, I can see like Caspi, Reggie Evans, and Ryan Hollins, and say let's put all of the pressure on the backcourt and Caspi to get us some points to keep us alive, but at the same time let's use Reggie Evans and Ryan Hollins to be defensive stoppers. And even Caspi splits last year with Houston were very impressive. He really improved as a defensive player. Of course, he does have Dwight Howard backing him up, but at the same time, he also had James Harden to his left or his right. So it's not like you can completely discredit
It's
what
like
Caspi did.
you got to cover two guys when you're playing next to James.
It is. It's like you may even have to cover three guys, including his beard. I mean, it's just horrible how he shows no interest on defense at all. But Caspi was that way when he was a young player as well, and now Caspi has grown into something different. He's a much different player than he was the first time around. So Aaron, let's talk about the Isaiah Thomas situation. I know this is something that we've talked with you about before when you were a guest on the podcast, but when you look at Sessions and Collison now, like if it was just Collison versus Isaiah Thomas, I think this team decreases in wins by 5. But because it's not that I think Collison is a horrible player. I just thought that this team realistically stayed alive in games last season because Isaiah Thomas just got sick and tired of losing and brought teams back. And if you don't have that, if you don't have the little engine that could, you're just gonna dry up and die. But again, the addition of Sessions sort of takes the pressure off Collison to be that all-world replacement for Isaiah Thomas. And to me, it ends up making a little bit more sense because now you got two guys that can do double figures. One guy is probably going to average 6 assists. Another guy is going to average like 4.5 or 5. So now from the point guard position, you're probably still getting 24 points a game, close to it, but you're also getting 11 or 12 assists, where last year the Kings weren't getting anything behind Isaiah Thomas at all for most of the season, and it was a struggle. So where are you at with that idea, the Isaiah Thomas being replaced?
It's kind of like the NFL. They say, if you got two quarterbacks, you got none. The it depends on what your end goal is. A team that's competing for a championship has different goals than a Sacramento Kings under new ownership.
Agreed, agreed.
Um, you know, Only one of 30 teams wins. Captain obvious here. So if you're gonna say a championship is our goal, then you really have to stack your team, and you're looking for guys that are under market, that play way over their head, obviously, that have that championship edge to them, that have that upside that can be tapped into. So, Isaiah Thomas probably had one of the worst situations. Kind of reminds me of Alex Smith when he had like 8 different offensive coordinators for San Francisco. You got a Malou family that shouldn't have owned a team. You had a coach that probably shouldn't have been coaching the team. You had just turmoil in terms of the point guard position itself, people being brought in, and then you had all the outside influences of the media never really giving Isaiah his due, the local media, that is. So this guy kind of just played in a really, really bad situation and always made the best of it. I would have been interested to see if there was kind of just a clean slate, if this guy just showed up from day one, if they said, you know what, we want you to run the ball. We want you to, be a pass first point guard, blah, 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 blah. All these different things, all the buzzwords that have been coming out. If this guy couldn't do the job that you guys are going to see this year out of Carlson Sessions and do it that much better. And because of where he was drafted, because of his size, because, all of these different factors, he's a really cheap player. So the whole thing, if you're GMing, is you want to get as many of those guys as you can. So when you want to load up and spend, or maybe you have to pay that Sacramento fee, come to our mid market. There's, you don't want free agency. Free agents don't want to come to Sacramento. Apparently that's what's out there. To get that guy to come, you might have to pay a little bit more. So you need to save money wherever you can. I think Isaiah Thomas he fits that profile of what you want to do as an organization. That I think that page is turned. I think Sacramento's, they're moving on. I think Isaiah's moving on. There's going to be a whole lot of interest in that first game that he comes back. I think wins and losses and everything in between is going to determine whether or not it was a smart move to let him go. As far as the two being together and being, do two of those guys equal one Isaiah Thomas? Probably, and it costs probably a little bit more money, and it takes a little bit more minutes for them to equal an Isaiah Thomas. Can one of those two guys be the quarterback of this team? Can one of those two? This is actually the best question. Can one of those two guys control DeMarcus Cousins? And that's probably the most interesting subplot of this whole thing, is that little drama between Boogie and Isaiah. Isaiah always stood up to him, and those guys were the best of friends for the longest time, and now there's a little bit of a chill between them. So can the 2 point guards, control a Boogie on the rampage?
I want to say something here about the controversy between Isaiah Thomas and DeMarcus Cousins. Look, I'm in the media scrum. I see how they are reacting, and the way that DeMarcus Cousins, realistically, he's only talked twice all preseason, all through training camp to date. He talked on media day, but that was in like a giant scrum where everyone's yelling at him. He came out one day and he gave us a really, really good 13 or 14 minutes. And in that conversation, somebody specifically asked, how is it going with the new point guards? And he said, it's going great. It's going excellent. And the way the question was phrased was like, look, we had talked to Malone, and he had said one of the toughest things for point guards is to come in just like we'll go back to the quarterback analogy. It's the toughest thing for a quarterback to come in and be in rhythm with his new wide receivers, because they all make different cuts. They all go different ways at different times. I know, the Kaepernick issue with Stevie Johnson with the 49ers, where Stevie Johnson has a really odd way of coming out of breaks, and Kaepernick couldn't pick up on it for the first a month and a half, 2 months they were together, and then all of a sudden they click. I mean, that's what we're talking about. There's a fluidity that goes on throughout a basketball game, a flow, and if you don't know how a player comes off a pick it's something you have to learn. You have to watch how Omri Caspi comes off a pick versus how Rudy Gay versus how Derek Williams comes off a pick. And so these are things that you have to start like building a knowledge base in your head and a like sort of a chemistry, but a comfortability level, and those are things that take a little while. So when DeMarcus Cousins was asked that question, it was with that understanding that Malone had said it takes a little while for point guards to kind of figure it all out. How's that going? And Cousins was very honest, like, "Hey, it's going great. I think the guys are doing a good job." And the way that that was taken by some national media members and put out there was that, "Oh, it's a burn on Isaiah Thomas," when that wasn't the intent. At least while I was standing there watching DeMarcus
And
Cousins.
this is why the podcast is so great, because you can articulate this stuff.
Yes.
Twitter, you can't, and then you play the game of telephone and it gets out there. And what's interesting about this is, so nobody called Isaiah throughout free agency, and because it was almost like
Yeah.
the writing was on the wall. I think probably 12 months ago the writing was on the wall. Everybody knew, and it was almost like, I don't know, name the Godfather movie where somebody's gonna go get whacked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk to that guy. Nobody wants to be like, hey, let's hang out. You're not gonna be here next year. And at the same time, all of the buzzwords have been filtered from the top of the organization and out through the media channels, and it's all the same thing every time. Pass first, quicker tempo. You hear Mike Malone talk about it. You hear Pete D'Alessandro talk about it. You hear the Sacramento Bee talk about it. Everybody's talking about it. It's almost like Boogie just used the same buzzwords that everybody else has been using, and those buzzwords were always like, depending on who's saying it and what context they're saying it, but oftentimes those have been used to slight Isaiah Thomas, mostly in the local media. So once he used those buzzwords, that's the same stuff Isaiah's been reading in the papers for years, and that's why I think he tweeted back. And then, probably since then those guys have talked. I haven't checked in with anybody to find out what's going on with Isaiah and Boogie Gate. But the interesting part about that, though, is the personalities are so fiery. You've got DeMarcus Cousins is a fiery personality. He might be one of the most difficult guys in the league right now, and that's where I come back to the job that Mike Malone is doing dealing with this. He's doing a great job, but B, can these point guards harness that energy? Will Rudy Gay, who's been very like, what, I'm not gonna handle this right now. You take care of yourself. Will he be able to channel the energy, and then ultimately will DeMarcus Cousins be able to channel himself?
Yeah, and let's be very clear. Like DeMarcus and I don't get along all the time. I mean, people are like, "Oh, whatever, whatever." There are many times where DeMarcus is not happy with me, and it's about things that I write. And DeMarcus is a guy who reads a lot of that's out there. Look, I'm not a guy who's going to sit here and defend DeMarcus Cousins left and right and tell you that his intentions were great all the time and that he didn't mean to do wrong. In this specific situation, I have DeMarcus's back
Right.
because honestly, like I when it happened and it came out that way and the way that it was tweeted out and everything else, like I didn't jump. I felt like almost like reaching out to Isaiah's people and saying, "Do you
Don't
want
worry
the
about this.
do you want the audio? Like, do you want the
Right.
audio? Because this is taken out of context, and Demarcus is getting roasted out of context, and I don't really think that that's fair. And I didn't do that, of course, but it's one of those situations that Demarcus has to deal with. Even in preseason, he's got 2 technical fouls in preseason, and they're the biggest weak sauce technicals of all time. But the fact is, he's DeMarcus Cousins. It's like, look, you may want to be someone different, but not everyone's ready to let you be that someone different yet.
Yeah, I could probably end the whole thing on this, is that it's just going to be fun to watch Sacramento Kings basketball this year for a team that's probably a lottery team. There's just a lot going on.
There is a lot going on. There is a lot going on. You know what? Let's take that opportunity right there, and we're going to transition because these are some of the things that Aaron Brewski brings to the table. We're going to talk a little bit more globally about basketball this season on the podcast, a little bit more NBA in general, and we'll bring in some topics from time to time. But Aaron, let's talk about the NBA in general for a few minutes. Let's do around the NBA. Let's say new faces in different places. Um, there are some major, major moves that went on this season, and how do you think that they're going to play out in this upcoming season? Guys like LeBron James and Kevin Love. Like, so what is your sort of list of guys who can have an immediate impact on the NBA this season and maybe take a team that was decent and make them into a title contender or a deeper playoff team?
Well, you have two distinctly different things going on in the East and the West. The West is like the wild, wild West. There's 9 teams battling for 8 spots. Maybe somebody gets hurt, and the New Orleans Pelicans get in there and fight for one of those spots, or maybe they play over their heads and they fight. But there are 9 teams that could legitimately compete for the Eastern Conference Championship. So that we'll just set that aside for a second. Over in the East, it's. I mean, we heard about it all summer. LeBron, Kevin Love. The thing that makes it even a million times more intriguing to me is David Blatt. The coach is one of these just really unique individuals who is good on both sides of the ball. He's very entertaining with the press. He can handle these personalities. It's kind of a wonder that he hasn't made it over to the league already. And a guy that worked under Pete Carrill. So they are the test case for, can a team be thrown together and pull it together in one year, just kind of like LeBron did when he went to Miami the first time. Different circumstances there. This is a much more talented roster in Cleveland, and then you put that across from the Chicago Bulls, who, with the addition of Pau Gasol, are just nasty, and he is playing over any expectation that I had for him. And we're just talking about preseason right now. He looks like Pau from 2 to 3 years ago.
But
He's
he's
quick.
old. He's
He's
old.
old. Oh, he's old. But he's quick right now. He looks a little lighter, like he might have gotten in some extra special shape. He's got a lot to prove right now. The Lakers, Kings fans can revel in one thing: it's that the Lakers are a total mess right now. So he's leaving that, and this is his last go. He's got a real good shot at another ring. That team is, when you look at them defensively with their coach and their personnel, they can lock down just about anybody in the league. I pity to think what they would do to a team that's in the lottery if they really, really, really wanted to lock them down on any given night.
Yeah.
So
On the Bulls, the one thing I like about the Bulls is that not only do you have Joakim, alongside Powell, you're giving him like a great defensive player next to him and a good passer. But then when you go to Taj Gibson, you can always like slide Gasol over to the 5, and now you've got a great defensive 4. I mean, just like the dynamic of that front court is really, really nice.
and you move them, and then you look at the middle of the lineup. You get Mike Dunleavy, who's been around every block, played really well last year for a guy that's been injured his whole career. The guy played in all 82 games, and for a coach that's criticized for running his players into the ground, because he does, almost everybody played 82 games last year with the exception of Rose, and all about that. But this is a team that's tough. Up the middle, they've got Mike Dunleavy, who's kind of a Swiss Army knife player at this stage in his career. And then you bring in the rookie, McDermott, and this kid can shoot lights out. It might take a little while for him to have a significant role in the rotation, but he's a coach's son. He knows where to be on the floor. He looked great at Summer League. That's the middle of their lineup. And then you have Jimmy Butler, who looks like he's added extra dribbling to his game, a little bit of extra shooting. He's also a lockdown defender at the 2 or the 3. And you think for a second, you're like, the only question mark we have on this team, is the former MVP, Derrick Rose.
That's a pretty good question mark to have.
Yeah, and as long as he's, if he just simply stays in his lane, I think they can win the Eastern Conference Championship. So you've got those two competing ideals. Can LeBron carry a team with Kevin Love and company, Kyrie Irving, that type of talent? Can they mesh it all together against this ferocious, 1985 Chicago Bears type team, in the Bulls?
Yeah. No, I like the Bulls. I do. I like what they've done. I like the additions. Even, I don't like Mike Dunleavy. I didn't like him at Duke. I don't like him, like, typically as a player. DeMarcus Cousins and I are, like, on the same page. I'm not going to call him a clown, but that doesn't mean that I respect his game greatly. But he is tough. He is physical. He is a good passer. He's got a high basketball IQ. He's a guy who can really, really aid in the development of Doug McDermott. And also, let's add on to the Pau Gasol, with those other two bigs. I mean, if you can bring in McDermott and you can put him with Noah and with Tosh Gibson, I mean, you've got all the defensive support you need there. I mean, even like, you come off the bench with some other guys in the backcourt and stuff that are bigger, that are more physical. I like the way that they've constructed that team, and it's a team that's been together for the most part. Most of the pieces have been together for a long time. You're adding like a Hall of Fame player in Pau Gasol, who is in the twilight but still has a lot left in the tank. And I think they are probably the team to beat right there with Cleveland. And I'm not, sure that LeBron went to a situation in Miami where Chris Bosh was more than willing to take a step back. Dwayne Wade was more than willing to take a step back. I haven't heard Kevin Love talk about taking a step back, and I certainly haven't heard Kyrie Irving talk about taking a step back. It takes a lot to win and a lot of sacrifice. And the Sacramento Kings found out last year what having three 20-point scorers felt like. It didn't feel good. It felt really bad for the other 10 guys. So
The,
it's a freeze out.
yeah, and the one thing though that's different, those Miami Heat teams were some of the worst championship teams, that I've seen in a while. Not deep. They've got their
Outside of the stars, yeah.
right. That just they that's when you have to sign those guys to those max deals or just close to max deals. You really do have to count on those guys and get a little lucky with some rookie scale contracts. And that's where you're at with a guy like Kyrie Irving is he's at a max, but it's a much lower max. You got Dion Waiters on his rookie scale deal. You've got guys that fit the situation like Anderson Varejao as long as he can stay healthy,
Which he never does.
which he
Yeah.
never does. Yeah, he's going to miss 50 games every year. But the nucleus kind of just attracts to it. You had Sean Marion go there, Mike Miller, even Della Vedova is actually a great player for them. So they have it's a much better team than he ever had in Miami. But now he comes up against this Bulls team that's just scary. So that's the East. And the only team that I would say has a chance to even compete would be the Washington Wizards. But, I don't even know if we should go there.
Well, the Wizards do have some pieces. They're young. The Bradley Beal injury does hurt them substantially. The addition of Paul Pierce is intriguing. I don't know. They're sort of that team that's up and coming that you just don't know if they're going to take that giant leap or if they're going to level out and kind of try to add pieces that make sense to them but really don't make sense overall. Again, Paul Pierce he's either going to make a lot of sense or he's not going to make any sense at all, and he's going to be, a train wreck there, in my opinion.
If these guys do anything, if they make any noise in the playoffs, it's going to be because their players all took the same step forward at the same time. There's a lot of potential on that team. They fit with each other. The pieces work. They just all have to walk through the door at the same time and be perfect while doing it because the Bulls and the Heat, they're just too good.
Yeah.
Or pardon, Bulls and the Cavs.
Oh
Wow.
yeah. The Bulls and the Cavs are just too good. All right, Aaron. Well, let's talk about one last thing before we head out the door. This season, we are going to bring in something different again. This is something that Aaron is very good at. He has a huge knowledge base, but fantasy sports, fantasy basketball is taking off. It may not be in the realm of fantasy football yet, but it's growing and it's a real hot button topic. It's something that Aaron has a great specialty in, and something that I think we can deliver on the podcast here, on a weekly format. So at least some ideas for you in your fantasy draft, ideas for you in your lineups for the week. Who makes sense, who doesn't. So, Aaron, why don't you give us a rundown? I'm a fantasy football guy. I'll be honest with you. I haven't played fantasy basketball in a really long time. I intend on playing this year with a group of sports guys that probably will bust my chops. But this is my 25th year of fantasy football. I started playing when I was very young. And back in the day where you had to wait for Monday's newspaper to come out to get the box score so you could actually score your fantasy football. And but what is it that you look for in fantasy basketball, specifically in this season coming up?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, but fantasy basketball, it's really with the advent of League Pass, and the same thing happened in fantasy football when Sunday Ticket and live scoring hit, that industry really exploded. It's been a specialty of mine for about 10 years, and it's interesting. More people play fantasy basketball from the team side, the front offices than you would ever imagine. We're in a league right now. It's kind of a semi-secret league. It's out there in the public, but there's some guys there that work for teams and stuff, and the um, it's more realistic than the football counterpart. You really do have to know the players, and the way the game is scored is pretty similar to the way an NBA basketball game or a team is set up. So there's some real synergies there, and a lot of execs that I talk with that play, they do it to keep sharp on every player on every roster on every team and have fun doing it. So for the person that's looking at fantasy basketball for the first time, it's a lot like football. If you've ever played football, you pick players, you're drafting, you're looking for guys that people don't know about that are going to do real well. A guy like Isaiah Thomas has been a great fantasy player for years. And the way you do that is, I'll plug our site over at NBC. We have a site called rotoworld.com that literally puts the news out there faster than anybody else on the internet. So if you just read it for regular basketball, you would get your news as fast as possible and just on a 24/7 basis. So if it breaks in the middle of the night, there's somebody there that's putting it out. So really what you want to do is you want to look and see who are these guys that are going to win me a championship. And right now Kevin Durant was that guy. He just went down, he just had his surgery. He'll be out for 6 to 8 weeks, probably at a minimum. So right now, fantasy owners are dealing with the question, well, do I take a guy like Anthony Davis, who contributes in all of these different scoring categories for fantasy, or do I stick with kind of the old and boring LeBron James, who has a really bad playoff schedule? So if you've played fantasy, that it can get a little bit in depth, probably a little bit too much inside basketball for this podcast. But I would start looking at rotoworld.com, start reading the information about the players. You want to kind of figure out where you might be able to draft them. I'll put out a top 150 list here in the next, I think it comes out Monday, where I rank 150 players, and you can take that list into your draft and dominate every single year. But yeah, it's just a lot of fun, and it's just a good way to keep sharp. And I've kind of moved into a different direction where I do more reporting and even business reporting. But I don't know that I'll ever stop doing fantasy because, for our jobs, we have to know what's going on in the league. It helps me to know what Troy Daniels is doing in Houston, as a 15th or 14th man, who's probably going to make the roster because he's one of the best shooters in the NBA now.
Yeah, I think what fantasy sports does is it makes you a better fan of a sport. And I've long thought that, it makes you interested in what's going on. And, looking at like tonight's game, realistically, I could care less about the Jets and the Patriots matching up tonight. I could care less about it. But the problem is that I've got Brandon LaFell starting for me in fantasy football tonight, so I'm going to at least tune in a bit and watch and see what happens and see if Tom Brady hits 12 targets, one time each, or if he gives LaFell like 6 looks just to see if I can score something.
Let me do your listeners a favor. If they've got paper and pen, I'll just rattle off a bunch of names that I like right now.
All right.
And that you could probably get at a reasonable price in your draft.
Wait, I'm going to stop you. They're not my listeners anymore, Aaron Brewski.
Oh, that's right.
They're our listeners. Our
oh,
listeners.
My goodness.
Now go.
Okay. All right. Stephen Curry, Russell Westbrook is going to kill it. I love that guy. Anthony Davis, that kind of goes with that saying. DeMarcus Cousins is going to be a beast this year. Serge Ibaka gets underdrafted every year. He's a fantasy stud. Pick him up. Kawhi Leonard, don't sleep on this guy. He is the truth. He'll be a first-round value this year. Let's go a little further down my list here. A guy like Victor Oladipo, he hasn't played this preseason. His knee is acting up. I think they're just saving him for opening night. He's going way too low in drafts. I think he'd be a top 20 value by the end of the year. And this is stuff that's actually not even hit rotoworld.com yet. So you guys are getting it before everybody else. I try to release it as late in the year because everybody just takes what we put out there and then they put it on their own sites.
Oh, they make a
And then,
magazine and throw it in there.
well,
Yeah.
no, it's like, it's just like the game of telephone. Everybody just starts repeating themselves. When I go into a draft, I play, so your listeners know, I play in a lot of big money drafts where, the entry fees are pretty high. I don't like it because those guys, they will take what I write into that draft and use it against me. So I try to release everything as late in the year as possible so people can't jump all over it. Yeah, and if you know what, for our listeners, if any of you guys want to send me a tweet at Aaron Bruski, AARONBRUSKI, if you guys want to ask me questions, I will give you the information before we publish it on Monday.
Excellent. All right, so that's going to do it for this portion, well, for this episode of the Cowbell Kingdom Podcast. Before we go, I do want to throw a shout out to our incredible photographer slash videographer, Kamani David. Kamani has had a rough go over the last week. He had some stomach problems that led to some surgery. He's been in the hospital, and he's going to continue to be in the hospital. I think he's looking at like a 10-day hospital stay, which is unpleasant for anyone. So lots of love going out to Kamani. If you get a chance, send him a tweet, say hello, wish him well, hope he feels better soon, which is, I think, at Kamani David. I think it is at Kamani David on Twitter.
There might be a letter in between his first and last name.
Oh, now we're going to have to look it up. I hate being inaccurate here because Kamani's one of our good guys.
This is a really good guy, and Kamani, get better.
Yeah, and literally the dude has he was born with an issue, and over the course of time, it's taken its toll on Kamani. So yeah, it is at Kimani, KIMANIW David on Twitter. Send him a get well soon. And you know what, Aaron? We'll be back next week. We're gonna have a guest. And there's no more of this. We've got a new co-host thing. This is a weekly thing. Aaron Bruski is now a member of the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. It will be me and Aaron from here on out. And hey, man, I'm really, really excited to have you on board, and I know Kings fans everywhere are going to be excited as well.
I'm fired up. I'd recently moved to Sacramento. It's a great city. A lot of respect for the city and what it's done in the last 3 years. Everybody's treated me great. It's been kind of a match made in heaven from that point of view. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. For Aaron Bruski, I am James Ham. Tune in next week. We'll have more for you. Everything from Sacramento Kings basketball to NBA basketball to a little fantasy hoops talk. Thank you for listening to the Cowbell Kingdom podcast.